10 years after he vanished, the sound of his voice shattered the fragile peace I'd built, only to reveal that my fiancé was the real criminal and my runaway love was my final dangerous savior. The smell of cheap disinfectant and stale coffee still clings to the corners of my memory when I think of that day. I was 23, buzzing with a nervous energy that tasted like metal on my tongue, clutching a thin, flimsy piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket or a death warrant. It felt like both. I was in Leo's tiny, perpetually messy apartment. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, slanted across the worn, avocado-green shag carpet that he swore he'd replace next month. Leo. He was everything I thought I wanted then. Charismatic, reckless, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. He was 25, chasing a dream of being a screenwriter, which mostly involved him nursing lukewarm instant ramen and critiquing B-movies on a laptop held together with duct tape. We were, in the language of my mother, a train wreck waiting to happen. But in my language, we were in love. A volatile, exhilarating, all-consuming kind of love that burned too brightly to last. I remember setting the little white stick down on the chipped Formica kitchen counter. It sat between a stack of unpaid bills and a half-eaten jar of pickles. I'd taken 3 tests just to be sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. They weren't. Leo. My voice was a reedy whisper. I hadn't practiced this. There was no grand speech, no carefully rehearsed delivery, just the raw, terrifying truth hanging in the stale air. He didn't look up immediately. He was hunched over his keyboard, fingers flying, muttering dialogue to himself. "Hold on, babe, just got the perfect scene transition. The protagonist needs a moment of quiet before the inevitable betrayal, you know? Leo, stop." This time there was a sharpness to my tone that finally broke his concentration. He sighed dramatically, pushing his unruly dark hair back from his forehead. His eyes, usually so bright and full of sparks when he talked about his scripts, narrowed slightly. "What is it, Elle? Did the landlord finally kick over the recycling again? Because I swear, I pushed the counter between us, drawing his attention to the small object resting there. He followed my gaze, his expression moving through confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally, something cold and utterly unfamiliar, spreading across his face. He looked at the test, then back at me, as if trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the reality standing before him. The silence stretched. It wasn't the comfortable silence we usually shared when watching a movie. It was heavy, suffocating, punctuated only by the distant groan of city traffic 5 floors below us. "Pregnant?" he finally managed, the word sounding alien on his tongue, stripped of all warmth. I nodded, tears pricking at the back of my eyes, but refusing to fall. I was steeling myself for the explosion, the shouting, the panic declarations of forever love. I was ready for the argument. But Leo didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't even look at me again. He stood up slowly, backing away from the counter as if the positive result was contagious. He walked to the small living area, picked up his worn leather jacket from the back of the sofa, and grabbed his keys. I need air," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "I can't breathe in here, Elle. Just give me a second, I'll be right back." He didn't take a second. He was gone before I could form the word, wait. The front door clicked shut with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any slam. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the door, convinced he'd just run to the corner store for cigarettes and a breath of fresh air. Minutes bled into an hour. The sunlight faded, turning the dust motes orange, then gray. I finally sank onto the cold linoleum floor, the silence pressing in, realizing with a sickening lurch that the only thing he'd taken with him wasn't a breath of air, but the entire future we thought we shared. When the sun came up the next morning, Leo's jacket was still missing. His side of the closet was bare, and the only thing left behind was that flimsy white plastic stick and the terrifying knowledge that I was utterly, completely alone. I called his phone a dozen times, but it just rang into the void where he used to be. The first few months were a blur of panic, exhaustion, and the relentless, mundane task of navigating bureaucracy alone. My parents, who had always viewed Leo with deep suspicion, reacted with a predictable mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. "We told you so." Their silence screamed louder than any actual condemnation. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, the pink wallpaper suddenly feeling suffocatingly juvenile, and started applying for every administrative assistant job I could find. The dream of screens and scripts was replaced by the urgent need for insurance and reliable income. Leo didn't just leave, he evaporated. No text, no email, no forwarding address. It was as if the moment I uttered the word pregnant, the universe had snapped its fingers and erased him from the ledger of my life. I stopped checking his old haunts, the coffee shop where he'd write, the dive bar where he'd try to convince bartenders to fund his passion projects. I needed to build a wall, solid and high, between the reckless girl who loved him and the determined mother I was becoming. 10 years passed. 10 years of scraped knees, late-night fevers, parent-teacher conferences, and the quiet, fierce pride of raising my son, Alex. Alex was everything Leo wasn't, steady, empathetic, and possessed of an unnerving calm. He had my eyes, but his laugh, deep and genuine, sounded oddly familiar, a sound I couldn't quite place until I realized it had Leo's cadence. I never spoke his father's name. When Alex asked, I told him his father had left before he was born. A clean, simple narrative that required no messy excavation of old wounds. Life settled into a predictable, comforting rhythm. I got my degree online while Alex was in kindergarten, moved us into a small 2-bedroom house with a manageable mortgage, and even started dating a kind, stable man named Marcus, an accountant who brought me tea when I had a headache and never ever left anything unresolved. We were safe. We were good. Then came the call. It was late. Marcus was out of town on a work trip, and I was trying to get Alex to finish a particularly complicated Lego set while simultaneously reviewing quarterly reports for work. The phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number from a distant area code. "Hello?" I answered, my voice tired. "Eliza, is that really you?" The voice was deeper, weathered, undeniably male, and it sent a shockwave through my system that felt like touching a live wire. It was Leo's voice, but roughened, heavier with years I hadn't shared. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt the color drain from my face. Alex looked up, sensing the shift in my posture. "Who is this?" I managed, my voice strained. I was ready to hang up, to block the number, to pretend this call never happened, but something rooted me to the spot. "It's me, Elle. It's Leo." There was a beat of silence and then a ragged breath, sounding desperately close to tears. "God, Eliza, I'm so sorry. I've been trying to find you for years. I finally tracked down your old work number. Please, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. I need to explain." I stood paralyzed in the hallway, the Lego fortress crumbling beside me. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, threatening to shatter the fragile peace I'd spent a decade constructing. 10 years of silence. 10 years of meticulously building a life where Leo was a ghost. And now, his voice was breaking through the ether as if no time had passed at all. "Explain what, Leo?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I walked into the kitchen, kneading the solid counter beneath my hands. Explain how a man runs out on his pregnant girlfriend and lives his life as if she never existed. There is no explanation adequate for that. I know, you're right. Every single day for 10 years, you've been right, he pleaded. His voice cracked. It was cowardice, Eliza. Pure, unadulterated terror. I was a child playing at being a man, and when faced with something real, something monumental, I ran. I could hear movement in the background, the distant sounds of a life being lived, a life that wasn't mine. A car horn, maybe the clatter of dishes. It sounded jarringly normal, mocking the chaos his words were whipping up inside me. You don't get to call here 10 years later and demand an audience for your regret, I said, my control wavering. I don't care about your terror, Leo. It resulted in me raising a child alone. You forfeited your right to an explanation when you walked out that door. Eliza, please. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling because I saw him. The air went out of the room. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my fingers ached. Saw who, Leo? Are you tracking me? If you're stalking me, I swear... Alex, he whispered, the name thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher, a mix of pain, recognition, and awe. I saw Alex. I was downtown near the library 2 weeks ago. He was wearing that blue jacket with the patches, the one with the little astronaut patch on the sleeve. He looked exactly like you, but older, stronger. And then I saw you talking to him, kneeling down to tie his shoe, and I knew immediately. My entire body felt cold. We had taken every precaution. We lived far enough away, had kept a low profile. How could he have seen us? How could he have recognized a 10-year-old boy from a fleeting glimpse across a busy street? You need to stop looking for us, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. You leave us alone, Leo, permanently. I can't, he insisted, his voice suddenly gaining a desperate edge. I can't, Eliza, because when I saw him, I understood everything I threw away. He has my laugh, Elle. I heard it, and I realized I didn't just abandon you, I abandoned my son. I've been living half a life and seeing him. It broke me open. I need you to know that I have changed. I'm sober. I have a real job now. I built something stable. I came back, Eliza. I'm 2 blocks from your house right now. The world tilted. 2 blocks. He was 2 blocks away. The silence that followed his declaration was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. My rational mind screamed at me to call the police, to tell him he was trespassing on my peace, that he had no claim here. But beneath the fury, a tiny, treacherous sliver of my 23-year-old heart remembered the easy charm, the intoxicating promise of his presence. You're lying, I managed, though the frantic energy radiating through the phone suggested otherwise. I'm standing outside the little park on Maple Street, he said, his voice strained, like he was holding back a tidal wave of emotion. I saw the old oak tree where you used to read paperbacks when you were pregnant. You planted it, remember? I'm sitting on the bench, the one facing the swing set. Please, Eliza, just 5 minutes. I need to see you. I need to apologize properly, face to face. If you walk out there and you still want me gone, I promise I will disappear forever this time. But if you don't let me do this, I don't know what I'll do to myself. I looked towards the front door, my breath catching in my throat. Marcus wouldn't be back until tomorrow evening. Alex was already asleep in his room, blissfully unaware that the ghost he never knew was currently haunting the perimeter of our quiet life. 10 years of careful self-preservation warred with a sudden, blinding curiosity. What kind of man did 10 years of self-inflicted exile forge? My hand was still gripping the phone. I could hear the distant, muffled sound of city life, and then, through the window, I could almost make out the dark silhouette of the park 2 blocks over. The oak tree. I could see it in my mind's eye. "Don't move, Leo," I whispered, my voice raw. "Don't even breathe. I'm hanging up now." I slammed the phone down onto the counter, the plastic rattling violently. I walked towards the coat rack, my legs feeling like lead. I pulled my heavy winter coat over my shoulders, my mind a chaotic storm of anger, fear, and a terrifying, undeniable flicker of hope. I had protected Alex fiercely, always presenting a united front against the outside world. But this wasn't an external threat. This was the missing piece of our history, standing on a park bench, demanding to be acknowledged. I took one last deep breath of the safe, familiar air of my home, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped out onto the porch into the cold, inky darkness, heading toward the place where my past was waiting. When I reached the edge of the park, I hesitated, looking across the expanse of dormant grass toward the familiar oak, and then I saw him. He was sitting exactly where he said he would be. He was older, yes, etched with lines I didn't recognize, but the set of his shoulders, the way his head was bowed, it was unmistakably Leo. He looked up slowly as I approached, and the instant our eyes met across the distance, he stood up, a look of profound shock washing over his face, as if seeing a ghost he'd only dreamed of. He took one tentative step toward me, raising his hand in a gesture of appeal, when suddenly a harsh, bright beam of headlights flooded the area, blinding us both, and a heavy-set man in a uniform stepped out of the darkness behind him, saying something sharp and official into a radio. The blinding headlights pinned us both in place. Leo flinched back as if struck, his appeal instantly cut short. I shielded my eyes, confusion momentarily eclipsing my decade-long anger. Who was this man? A security guard? A concerned citizen calling the police on a strange man lurking near a playground late at night? "Stay right there!" The uniformed figure barked, his voice booming in the unnatural quiet of the deserted park. He was large, immovable, and his hand was resting near the holster on his hip. Leo, for all his past recklessness, seemed momentarily stunned into compliance, his appeal to me forgotten as he faced this new, tangible threat. "Wait, officer, there's been a mistake. I was just talking to my—" "Don't move a muscle," the officer repeated, taking a firm step closer to Leo. He didn't look at me, his entire focus laser-locked on the man who had just materialized from the shadows of my history. My heart began to race again, but this time the panic was different. It wasn't about Leo's potential intrusion. It was about his immediate peril. Why was this interaction escalating so fast? Leo hadn't done anything illegal. He was just standing on a public bench. "Sir, I'm not doing anything wrong," Leo insisted, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of non-aggression. "I just came to apologize to someone. I'm not armed." The officer ignored him, his eyes flicking past Leo, finally landing on me, standing frozen at the edge of the light. But instead of relief or curiosity, I saw a flicker of something cold, recognition, cross the officer's face. He lowered his hand slightly from his weapon, but his posture remained rigid. Eliza Hayes? The officer asked, his voice suddenly dropping its authoritative boom, becoming dangerously quiet and familiar. My blood ran cold again. This wasn't a random park patrol. This officer knew my name. Yes, that's me, I managed, stepping fully into the light, needing to shield Leo, or perhaps needing to understand who was holding the strings to this nightmare. The officer nodded curtly, then turned his full attention back to Leo, his expression hardening into something menacing. Leo Vance, we've been looking for you for a very long time. Looking for me for what? Leo demanded, confusion replacing his apology. I told her I ran, I left. I didn't steal anything, I didn't hurt anyone. You abandoned your post, Vance. The officer cut in, his voice laced with contempt. And you violated the terms of your parole agreement. You were supposed to check in weekly. You haven't checked in for over 9 years. Parole? My head spun. Leo hadn't been a screenwriter. He'd been an ex-con. He'd never mentioned a prison sentence, never hinted at a life before me that involved law enforcement tracking his movements. The chaos of our early relationship suddenly snapped into a terrifyingly sharp focus. His recklessness, the sheer terror that caused him to vanish, it wasn't just about fear of fatherhood. What are you talking about? I stepped forward, trying to interpose myself between the two men. He was chasing a script. He was trying to make it. The officer shot me a look that brooked no argument. Ma'am, stay back. Mr. Vance here was released on condition of strict supervision after serving time for fraud and multiple counts of embezzlement related to a startup venture he ran before he met you. When he missed his mandatory relocation check-in after your situation, we flagged him as a flight risk and absconder. He was supposed to be confined to the Tri-County area. He left the state, Eliza. He's been hiding. Embezzlement. Fraud. Not a struggling artist. A criminal hiding in plain sight. The weight of 10 years of lies crashed down on me. Everything. The duct-taped laptop. The constant subtle paranoia he exhibited. The way he always paid in cash. It all suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Leo looked utterly defeated, his shoulders slumping under the weight of this sudden exposure. It wasn't fraud, not really. It was stupid business investments that went sideways. I panicked when you told me about the baby because I knew they were closing in, and I couldn't face bringing a child into that mess. I was going to come back when it was clean. I swear, I was going to... Save it for your parole officer, Vance, the officer snapped, pulling out heavy-duty handcuffs with a practiced metallic snap. You're coming with me, and you, Miss Hayes, you're going to have to answer some questions about harboring a known fugitive. Leo saw the handcuffs coming. He looked at me, his eyes wide with desperation. The old, reckless fire momentarily reignited, but this time aimed at escape, not romance. No, you can't take me in here. Leo suddenly lunged, not toward the officer, but toward the dense cluster of trees bordering the back of the park, the direction opposite from where I stood. It was a desperate, clumsy move, made worse by years of confinement and fear. The officer didn't hesitate. "Freeze!" he yelled, drawing his sidearm fully. The moonlight glinted ominously off the barrel. I screamed, a raw, involuntary sound, watching Leo vault over a low stone wall separating the park from the darkness beyond. The officer leveled the gun, aiming not wildly but with deadly precision at the fleeing man. "Stop, or I will shoot!" I didn't know which outcome was worse, seeing Leo arrested or seeing him shot dead 2 blocks from the house I'd built for my son. I had to choose instantly. If he got away, he'd be gone again, perhaps forever, but at least alive. If the officer shot, the trauma would follow Alex and me into every quiet corner of our lives. Without thinking, I bolted, scrambling over the stone wall right where Leo had cleared it, putting myself squarely between the gun and the man who had just shattered my reality. "Don't shoot!" I shrieked, throwing my arms wide. The officer froze, his weapon momentarily wavering between me and the darkness where Leo had vanished. His eyes were wide with shock. He hadn't accounted for the fugitive's partner intervening. "Get back, Ms. Hayes. This is a felony stop," he warned, his finger tightening on the trigger guard. But Leo's desperate flight had bought him precious seconds. I heard a muffled sound from the dense woods, a vehicle engine roaring to life, followed by the squeal of tires fighting for purchase on wet earth. Leo hadn't been running toward the dark woods. He'd been running toward a pre-arranged escape vehicle waiting just beyond the tree line. The officer cursed loudly, realizing the fugitive was slipping away again, this time thanks to my intervention. He lowered his weapon slightly, turning his furious glare back to me. "You just complicated this immensely, Eliza," he growled, pulling out his radio again. "He's gone. Now you're obstructing justice." I stood shaking, breathing hard, staring into the impenetrable blackness where Leo had just disappeared, the roar of the departing car fading into the ambient hum of the city. I had just saved the father of my child, a criminal, a liar, a decade-long absentee, from being shot by the police. And as the officer started barking orders into his radio, detailing my description and demanding backup, I realized I had exchanged one nightmare for an infinitely worse one. I was now officially involved. Just as I was about to be handcuffed myself, my phone, still clutched in my coat pocket, buzzed violently. It was a text message. From Leo, the unfamiliar number. The officer was stepping towards me when I managed to pull the phone out. The message was short, stark, and terrifyingly final. "Thank you, Elle. I love you both. Tell Alex his dad finally found his way home. Don't look for me again. I mean it this time. Marcus just pulled into the driveway." The last sentence hit me with the force of a physical blow, momentarily eclipsing the immediate danger of the police officer bearing down on me. Marcus just pulled into the driveway. Marcus, my stable, kind, unknowing accountant fiancé, who was supposed to be 2 states away returning tomorrow evening. He was home early, and he was pulling onto the quiet, unassuming street where I was currently standing under the harsh glare of a police cruiser's emergency lights, being questioned about harboring a fugitive with a uniformed officer convinced I was an accessory to escape. The officer, hearing the change in my breathing, looked sharply from me to the direction of my street. "What was that? Who is that?" I couldn't speak. Leo's final text message played on a gruesome loop in my mind. Tell Alex his dad finally found his way home to the life he abandoned, only to escape again immediately, leaving me to deal with the fallout, all while Marcus was literally pulling up to our shared sanctuary. "It's nothing. It's just a wrong number," I choked out, shoving the phone back into my pocket as if it were radioactive. "Don't lie to me, Ms. Hayes," the officer roared, suddenly energized by the appearance of a potential accomplice, or worse, a co-conspirator. He gestured toward the cruiser parked haphazardly near the park entrance. "You're coming down to the station with me. Right now. You're obstructing, and you are officially connected to the flight of a known felon." As if on cue, a familiar pair of headlights swept across the park, illuminating the officer and me in a sickeningly bright, momentary spotlight. I recognized the gentle curve of Marcus's sensible sedan. He slowed down, clearly intending to turn into our driveway, but stopped short when he saw the flashing blue and red lights dominating the usually quiet corner of our neighborhood. Marcus, the man who never deviated from a schedule, who ironed his socks and triple-checked his retirement portfolio, had returned early, and he was walking straight into the middle of the wreckage Leo had just created. I panicked. I couldn't let Marcus see this. Not the police, not the cuffs, and certainly not Leo's shadow hanging over us. Marcus deserved certainty, peace, a life unburdened by my past sins. "No, you can't do this here," I cried out, making a desperate break toward my own street, intending to intercept Marcus before he saw the full extent of the scene. The officer lunged, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "You are under detention. Do not resist." I yanked back, fueled by a decade of suppressed rage and the sudden crushing weight of Leo's betrayal, a betrayal that now threatened to destroy the stable life I'd built with Marcus. "Let go of me." As we struggled, Marcus finally got out of the car. He must have seen the official uniform, perhaps heard the shouting. He was jogging toward us, concern etched deep onto his usually placid face. "Eliza, what is going on here? Officer, can I help?" Marcus asked, his accountant's voice trying valiantly to sound authoritative. The officer momentarily released me, instantly shifting his attention to the newcomer. Marcus, with his neat sweater and briefcase, presented a far more compliant, if confused, picture than the struggling woman. "Sir, step back. This woman is interfering with an arrest." The officer snapped at Marcus, already moving to intercept him as well. Leo's final words echoed again. "Tell Alex his dad finally found his way home. Home." Leo hadn't just run. He'd fled to disappear back into a life I knew nothing about, a life that involved crime and parole. And now he was truly gone again. And Marcus, the man who represented everything safe and good, was about to walk into the epicenter of my carefully concealed history. "Marcus, go home. Call my lawyer. Don't talk to him," I screamed, trying to push past the officer toward my fiancé, but the officer had his radio pressed to his mouth, calling for backup, reporting the obstruction, and mentioning the name Vance. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide, shifting from the aggressive officer to my frantic, disheveled self. He was processing the word Vance. He must have heard the officer say it clearly. "Vance?" "Eliza." "Who is Vance?" Marcus asked, his composure finally cracking. His voice was tight, laced with a sudden dawning horror. Before I could construct a lie, before I could even try to send Marcus away, the officer turned back to me, pulling his phone out and tapping quickly. "We just ran the plates on the vehicle that sped away from the scene, Ms. Hayes. It's registered to a known associate of Vance's, a Mr. Richard Thorne. But the real kicker, Eliza, the car that just pulled up right here, parked perfectly next to the curb, the one belonging to your fiancé?" He held up his phone, displaying a satellite image or perhaps a police database photo. It was Marcus's sedan. That car, Marcus Davies, was flagged by the DEA 3 years ago as a vehicle used in a series of money laundering transactions that ultimately bankrolled Vance's previous operation. We were watching the local area, waiting for Vance to make contact with anyone he knew in the vicinity. We weren't looking for Vance tonight, Ms. Hayes. We were waiting for him to meet his current money man. And judging by the fact that he just fled in Thorne's car and you're interfering in the arrest, the logical conclusion is that we just interrupted a highly organized reunion. The officer moved in, gripping both my arms firmly this time. "You're not just an obstruction, Eliza. You're part of the picture now, and your fiancé." He nodded toward a pale, statuesque Marcus, who was now looking at me as if I were a stranger carved from ice. "He just drove right into the crime scene." I looked at Marcus, seeing the trust shatter in his eyes, realizing that Leo hadn't just returned to apologize. He had returned to activate a network, dragging my respectable fiancé into the criminal entanglement I thought I had escaped a decade ago. And then, a new horror dawned. Leo had told me to tell Alex that his father had finally found his way home. If Marcus was involved in Leo's current operation, then Leo hadn't just fled tonight. He had fled straight back into the arms of the people who owned his debt. And I, by stepping in front of that bullet, had ensured that the police would look at Marcus too. The final chilling realization hit me like a physical blow. Leo hadn't apologized because he regretted leaving me. He had apologized because he needed me to create a distraction so he could activate his escape route, a route that involved Marcus. "Where is Alex?" I whispered hoarsely to the officer, desperate to get back to the house, but the officer just tightened his grip, forcing me toward the car. "Alex is safe, Ms. Hayes. We've already secured the residence. He's with a social worker," the officer said grimly. "You, however, have a lot of explaining to do about your fiancé's connections to a fugitive accountant from 3 years ago." And as they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, Marcus, standing frozen outside his own car, finally found his voice. But it wasn't directed at the police. It was directed at me, a strangled plea laced with betrayal that cut deeper than any handcuff. "Eliza, 3 years ago, you told me you met Leo after he was clean. Who is Marcus Davies?" Marcus's question hung in the humid night air, a sound more devastating than the siren now wailing as backup cruisers converged on the park entrance. "Who is Marcus Davies?" The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I, who had spent 10 years guarding the secret of my past, was now being interrogated while the man I thought was my future watched his own meticulously constructed facade crumble in real time. "Marcus, listen to me. It's not what you think," I pleaded, wrestling against the officer who was efficiently securing me in the back of the cruiser. The window was down, and I strained to be heard over the noise. "I swear, I only met Leo after I moved here. Marcus Davies is who I told you he was. I started using my mother's maiden name as my middle name, that's all. I never knew about any DEA flags, any money laundering, any of that." Marcus didn't move. He stood perfectly still, positioned awkwardly between his pristine sedan and the flashing patrol cars, his face a mask of devastation. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking only at me, at the woman he was planning to marry, realizing she was a stranger. "You changed your name, Eliza?" he asked, his voice unnervingly level, the accountant calculating the massive debt of deceit. "You never told me that. You told me your parents were Amelia and Robert Hayes. You signed loan applications with that name. You filed taxes with that name." The officer slammed the car door shut, cutting off my reply. The thick metal separated me from Marcus, from the life I was supposed to have, and plunged me into a ringing, suffocating darkness. I could see Marcus only in flashes as the cruisers maneuvered, lights strobing across his face, the face of a man whose entire reality was dissolving. The officer in the driver's seat leaned over, his expression a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed disgust. "You're going to have a lot of time to think about your history, Ms. Hayes. Let's start with the name change, and then we'll move on to the whereabouts of Mr. Vance. He's a serious fugitive, and you just bought yourself a front-row seat to the aftermath." I closed my eyes, trying to piece together the fragments. Leo had run from jail years ago. I had been an innocent bystander, or so I thought. But the officer's words about Marcus, the DEA flag from 3 years ago, that was the critical misalignment. Marcus had been in my life for 5 years. If he was flagged 3 years ago, it meant he was involved with Leo's criminal network while he was courting me. Was Leo's sudden reappearance tonight just a coincidence? A terrible, tragic coincidence? Or had Leo come back not to apologize to me, but to expose Marcus? The cruiser lurched forward, speeding away from the park, away from my house, away from Alex. As we turned the corner onto the main avenue, I risked one last look back. Marcus's car was still there, but now another police car had parked directly in front of it, boxing him in. The officer who had apprehended me was now walking toward Marcus, shining a flashlight into the sedan's interior. As the cruiser accelerated, the officer on my right pulled out his radio again, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Suspect Vance is confirmed fled scene via pre-arranged transport. Initiate lockdown protocol for secondary contact Davies Marcus. He's confirmed clean, but we need to secure his vehicle and question him about Vance's network. He's clean now, but he was connected. He's confirmed clean, but he was connected. The realization was paralyzing. Marcus wasn't Leo's enemy. He was Leo's recent financier, or perhaps his replacement in the old operation, using his boring accounting firm as a perfect cover. Leo hadn't run from me to protect me. He'd run from the law, and then he'd return tonight for a specific purpose: to burn down the life I'd built with the man who was probably cleaning up Leo's messes. Leo knew Marcus was connected. Leo knew Marcus was my fiancé. By reappearing tonight, Leo had ensured that both men in my life would be neutralized simultaneously. One, Leo, by escaping into the wind, and the other, Marcus, by being exposed by the police evidence Leo knew they were waiting for. If Leo had orchestrated this entire reunion, this confrontation, this exposure, why? Why destroy the safe harbor I'd found, only to vanish again? Unless that safe harbor was never safe at all, and his reappearance was an act of calculated revenge, or perhaps a twisted final act of protection. My mind raced through possibilities, all of them ending in ruin. I was being arrested for obstruction. My fiancé was being detained as an accessory, and our son, Alex, was alone in the house, now surrounded by police, being cared for by a stranger. The cruiser pulled up to the precinct. The cold, sterile lights of the station were a stark contrast to the familiar warmth of home. As the officer opened my door, ready to pull me out, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. I snatched it, ignoring the officer's command to leave the device in the car. The message was longer this time, a flurry of desperate, fragmented sentences that seemed to confirm every terrible suspicion. Eliza. They were closing in on Marcus, too. He was helping them hide the money from the old case. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to stop him from taking everything from you again. I saw Marcus's name in the files I pulled before I left. He's not safe. He was never safe. I had to give them a distraction. I had to give them me, to clear the path for you and Alex. Get a lawyer. Don't trust anyone who talks about paperwork. I'm heading south. I'll find a way to send you money, to tell you the truth about Marcus. But for now, you have to believe me when I say this. When they ask you who Marcus Davies really is, don't say you don't know. Tell them he's Leo Vance's former partner and that you just found out he's been laundering money for the organization that just tried to kill me tonight. I looked up from the screen, my face white, my breath ragged. Leo hadn't just run away from me. He had run for me, years ago, and then returned tonight not to reunite, but to perform one final catastrophic act of self-sacrifice. The man I thought was my stable future was, in fact, the threat he'd been running from all along. The officer was staring at my stunned expression. "What is it now, Hayes? Another message from your partner in crime?" I met his gaze, the anger replaced by a terrifying clarity. I had a choice: protect Leo's dangerous sacrifice or protect Marcus's comfortable lie. "Officer," I said, my voice steady for the first time all night, "you were right about one thing. I need to answer your questions. But you've got the wrong fugitive. Leo Vance isn't the one you should be looking for right now. You need to go back to that park. You need to look at Marcus Davies, and you need to check his real name, because Marcus Davies is the one who's been laundering money for the people Leo was running from." Before the officer could react to my stunning reversal, another loud, urgent sound erupted from the precinct lobby. The sound of glass shattering violently, followed by panicked shouts and the distinct rapid firing of suppressed gunfire. The cruiser lights flickered wildly as the officer spun around, radio pressed to his mouth, shouting, "Shots fired in the lobby! Clear the perimeter! Repeat, shots fired in the main hall!" I realized, with sickening certainty, that the network Leo had warned me about hadn't waited for the police to process the evidence. They had come directly to the source, to the precinct, to silence anyone who knew the truth. And I was sitting in the back of an unsecured car, just feet from the main entrance, my declaration having put a giant flashing target on my own head. The sudden eruption of violence inside the precinct was primal, immediate, and terrifyingly close. The officer beside me recoiled, his focus instantly ripped away from securing me to the immediate threat unfolding just yards away. His professional calm dissolved into raw instinct. He threw open my door, shoving me roughly out onto the asphalt. "Stay down! Do not move!" he yelled, drawing his weapon again and sprinting toward the shattered glass doors of the main hall, his voice swallowed by the chaos. I didn't stay down. Leo's final, desperate text hammered in my ears. "I came back to stop him from taking everything from you again." He hadn't just exposed Marcus, he had set a trap, forcing the organization's hand, knowing they would move to silence the weak link, Marcus, and simultaneously expose me by implicating me in the confession. I scrambled away from the cruiser, diving behind the thick concrete pillar nearest the parking lot entrance. My body was trembling uncontrollably, but my mind was suddenly sharp, honed by the decade of single-parent resilience and Leo's final convoluted warning. I pulled out my phone again, the screen cracked, but functional. I had to call Alex. I had to confirm he was safe, that the social worker had arrived. I dialed my home number, my heart pounding against my ribs so hard I thought the device might crack further. It rang twice before a calm female voice answered. "Hello, this is Officer Miller. I'm with Child Protective Services. Alex is safe, ma'am. He's with me now. He's quiet, though he seems distressed by the commotion outside." "Officer Miller, listen to me," I whispered urgently, the sound of distant shouts and alarms bleeding into the phone line. "The man you think is his father, Marcus Davies, he's not who he seems. He's involved in this mess. If anyone comes here asking for him or asking about me, you tell them nothing. You tell them you are waiting for my lawyer. Do you understand? If they approach you, you call 911 and report an aggressive stranger." "Understood, Miss Hayes. I will protect Alex. Please stay safe." Hanging up, I felt a small, desperate anchor dropped in the storm. Alex was secure. Now for the wreckage. I risked a peek around the pillar. The scene was pandemonium. Uniformed officers were streaming out of the precinct, weapons drawn, converging on the lobby entrance. The firing had stopped, replaced by shouting and the metallic clink of handcuffs. Whoever was responsible for the attack was either neutralized or had retreated into the night. And then I saw Marcus. He was being led out of the main entrance, his hands bound behind his back, his impeccably tailored suit now ripped, his face ashen. He looked utterly broken, exactly the way I felt 10 years ago. As they pushed him toward a waiting, unmarked vehicle, his eyes swept the parking lot, searching wildly, frantically. And then he saw me hiding behind the pillar, his gaze locked onto mine, a look of pure, desperate betrayal. It mirrored the look Leo had given me 10 years prior, but amplified by the weight of his own secret guilt. He mouthed something, wordlessly accusing me of setting him up, of being the reason he was going down. I didn't move. I couldn't. I had made my choice, trusting the last words of the man who had broken my heart over the comfortable lie of the man who had nearly destroyed my future. As Marcus was forced into the back of the unmarked sedan, the officer who had apprehended me suddenly reappeared from the precinct doors, breathing heavily, his attention now focused entirely on me. He saw me emerging from behind the pillar, the phone still in my hand. "You!" he barked, rushing toward me. "You are going to explain exactly what you meant about Davies being the operative, and you are going to explain how you got this information while being detained." I walked toward him, steadying my trembling legs. I had played Leo's final dangerous game, and now I had to own the board. "I meant exactly what I said," I stated clearly, planting my feet. "Leo Vance didn't come back tonight to reconcile with me. He came back because Marcus Davies was feeding information to the people who were hunting him, the organization that financed Vance's initial fraud scheme. Leo knew Davies was still active, and he knew Davies was my fiancé. He used my reappearance as the necessary catalyst to force the hand of the federal agents who were tracking Davies. He came back to blow the whistle on the man I was about to marry, knowing that the resulting chaos would expose Davies and hopefully give me time to get Alex clear." The officer stopped, his hand hovering near his weapon. He scrutinized my face, searching for the deception he'd been trained to find. "That's a hell of a story, Hayes, and an awfully convenient one given your recent interference." "It's the truth," I countered, meeting his gaze evenly. "Leo Vance was a mess of a man who made terrible choices 10 years ago. He ran because he was a coward and terrified of bringing a child into his failure. But in the last 10 years, he somehow found a conscience, enough to sacrifice his own tenuous freedom to clean up the mess that Marcus Davies stepped into." I paused, taking one last painful look toward the sedan carrying Marcus away. Leo is still on the run. He's sacrificing everything to stay ahead of those people, giving me time to explain what I know about Davies to the authorities. He is running from them so that I don't have to marry one of them. The officer took a slow, deliberate breath, pulling out a fresh notepad. The silence stretched, thick with the smell of burnt rubber and disinfectant. He finally nodded, a gesture of reluctant concession. "All right, Ms. Hayes. If you know anything about Marcus Davies' current financial operations, you're coming with me as a cooperating witness, not a suspect. But understand this. If you lied to me, if you helped Vance escape tonight, you will face federal charges far worse than obstruction. You walk into that precinct and you tell us everything you know about Davies' connection to Vance's old associates. Everything." I stepped forward, finally allowing him to guide me toward the station doors, stepping over the shards of glass that used to be the window between my old life and my new one. As I walked through the threshold, the chaos inside had subsided. The shooting had stopped. The agents were already packing up their equipment. I saw the officer who had been questioning Marcus pointing toward the exit, clearly briefing his colleagues on the new development, the cooperating witness inside. Just as I reached the main desk, ready to start signing statements and rebuilding my testimony from scratch, a single plain white envelope lay waiting on the cool marble counter, placed clearly in front of where I was about to stand. It looked like it had been there waiting for me, placed by someone who knew exactly where I would end up. I picked it up. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single, crisp $100 bill, the exact amount I remembered him owing me from that disastrous first month we lived together, and a tiny folded piece of paper, barely the size of a postage stamp. I unfolded it. The handwriting was Leo's familiar, dramatic script. Go get that life you deserved, Elle, and when you finally tell Alex, tell him his dad was a reckless idiot who loved his mom more than he feared the dark. Elle. There was no address, no phone number, no further explanation. Just that impossible gesture of closure, delivered at the precise moment I needed it most, confirming both his love and his permanent departure. He was gone again, truly gone this time, having successfully cleared the wreckage he left behind, leaving me standing in the debris of two shattered illusions, holding the last piece of him, $100 and a final,